This podcast is brought to you by ShortsTV and is not affiliated with the Oscars or the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences in any way.
Hello and welcome. You're listening to the ShortsTV podcast. I'm Carter Pilcher, and I'm joined, as always, by the effervescent Rasha Goel.
Well, thank you, Carter. I always appreciate your choice of words in introducing me. Always a pleasure to be here. You know, we are just a few days away from the Oscar ceremony. How are you feeling?
I am pretty excited. I have voted. Everything's done. It's really a different year, though, and for the filmmakers, it's probably more different. A lot of the glitz and glamour is gone. There are a lot of restrictions because of the pandemic. But I'll tell you what. One of the things this year has really done is made it possible to focus more on the films, more on the filmmakers, and I feel like at least I've gotten much deeper into the stories themselves. It really is nice to have the films kind of at the center of what we're thinking about.
Yes, I agree. You know, there's this special hype and excitement when you're actually at the Oscars. But on that same line, we've got some very interesting stories. And speaking of, we are talking to Skye Fitzgerald, who's been nominated for an Oscar for his short documentary, Hunger Ward.
And this is his second Oscar nomination. His first was back in 2019 with a documentary called Lifeboat, which followed a group of volunteers who are out on boats in the Mediterranean rescuing migrants from sinking rafts in the sea.
A lot of his films are around humanitarian causes, and we can see that with his next short, Hunger Ward, which follows on the theme of displacement. It's set in Yemen and follows two healthcare workers who fight to save the lives of hunger-stricken children.
I don't have a magic to change everything. It's not my rule. At least at my position, I did my utmost work, but I can't change anything beside me.
Well, Skye, thank you so much for being here today. It's such a pleasure to have you to talk about this compelling film that you've made. We'd love to start off by asking you what inspired you to tell this particular story. I mean, how did you hear about some of the people that you'd work with, and why tell this story?
Well, what's happening in Yemen is it's the greatest humanitarian disaster in the world, and it's one that is largely invisible, at least in the West. I think it's much more on sort of the radar of the media in Europe and the Middle East, obviously, and North Africa. But here in the U.S., it really is virtually unheard, unseen, and to me that's an incredible tragedy. Because the scale of the disaster is so great, and because our own government is complicit in that disaster, that I really felt called upon to do what I could in my own small way to bring it to the largest audience I could, because it is a unique moment in history where we can intervene in a meaningful way to end the embargo over the country, which is actively causing the starvation of children.
Skye, could you tell us a bit more about the trilogy as a whole?
Yeah, so it began as sort of this loose idea I had just based on the knowledge that one of the greatest challenges we have as a global community right now is displacement, frankly.
Right.
1% of the planet's population, almost 80 million people, are currently displaced from their homes because of, to a great extent, conflict and other reasons, but conflict is a huge part of that. And so I knew that, that's such a big idea, right? How do you get your head around 80 million people who are, the scale of it is numbing, right?
Yeah.
And I thought, how can I intervene in a meaningful way using my own tool of cinema that maybe will help people understand it in a way that compels them and moves them to action. And to me, that's through the singular force of the individual, right?
Right.
So the first film, 50 Feet from Syria, we filmed on the Turkish-Syrian border with an orthopedic surgeon who was volunteering, operating on refugees flowing across the border into Turkey. The second one, of course, studied asylum seekers across the central Mediterranean. And for me, with each one, I felt like I've become more and more driven to do everything in my power to continue to bring this to the attention of the world however I can. in particular, the Hunger Ward, the one that we filmed in Yemen, as I noted, it is the largest humanitarian disaster in the world. And it's one that multiple governments are complicit in. It's a human caused famine, and it's something we can make a difference on. And the fact that we have the global resources, but not the global will to intervene to end the war, it makes me angry.
Hmm.
Carter, it makes me angry that I wake up in a world where a 10-year-old girl can weigh 24 pounds.
It's heartbreaking too, I would say, at the same time, because especially given the resources we have in this country and you're looking across the world, where the resources are stopped from going to them. I think that is just what was really touching for me to see.
That's just something that people, they aren't aware of. There's just no awareness there, and that's because there's a journalistic embargo on the country by the countries, Saudi Arabia and the Emiratis, who control access to the country. They don't allow journalists in. There's a standing order to not give visas to journalists. And then if you're a native journalist, indigenous journalist, if you do a story that the Emiratis or the Saudis don't want told, you'll be disappeared, killed, or put in prison. Our field producer for Hunger Ward, one of the two that we had, months after we left, he was doing a story with a couple French journalists, and it was a story that the Emiratis didn't want told about sort of complicity with arms in the country. He was arrested last September, detained and tortured for 6 months. And we did everything in our power to bring this to the global attention. And it took 6 months to get him released. And that's simply because he was doing his job as a journalist. So it's an inherently dangerous thing. And so we have to break through that pressure and that journalist blockade to get the story out.
Can you just tell us a little bit about how you got in? You're aware of the situation. You wanted to bring it to the world's attention. How did you get in? How did you film it? How did you get access, amazing access to these hospitals? How did that happen?
Well, Carter, that's a great question. And, I was talking with Nick Kristof 2 days ago because he's done some great, remarkable reporting in Yemen that has influenced sort of where I worked in the country. And when we had that conversation, he told me that it took him 2 years to get his visa. And I suddenly felt wonderful. I was like, wow, it only took us 8.5 months to get our visa, right? So I thought that took so long, but it took Nick Kristof 2 years. So that gives you a sense of just how powerful this journalistic embargo is, right?
Right.
And so it took us 8.5 months to get the visas, multiple trips to the Yemeni embassy in DC, pulling a lot of strings behind the scenes with fellow colleagues who had sort of taken the path before and knew how to navigate it. So once we had those visas, at first they only gave me one. And I went back to them. We'd asked for two, right?
Right.
And I went
Of
back to
course.
them and I said, well, actually, I'm not sure I can shoot this film just by myself, right? So I did successfully get a second visa. So that was one part. Just getting into the country was difficult. And then we were limited by duration. So they only gave us 30 days in country. And basically, if you overstay that, you're then imprisoned or you're immediately kicked out of the country. So we had to shape our entire narrative to this knowledge that we had literally 30 days and no second chances.
So you have to pre-plan each day.
Yeah, yeah. And then when something happened, pivot very quickly to embrace a new narrative.
I'd love to talk to you about the filming aspect and the choice of style, because with Hunger Ward, it almost seems as a viewer that you are immersed there in that situation, that I'm there with these patients and with the hospital staff. So walk us through your choices and how you worked through the filming of this short film.
Yeah, there's sort of two pieces of that for me. One is the aesthetic piece, right? Which is that I really wanted to place a viewer in as visceral a fashion as possible into the work of what I see as these heroic doctors and nurses doing this tireless, invisible work of saving children. And to do that, I wanted to allow moments to unfold without intervening as a filmmaker as much as possible. So I did that by just having two people filming, no sound person, so there was no boom pole ever to interfere with the scene or to remind people. So it was just two of us with long lenses so that we could become sort of part of the intimacy of the scene, tuck ourselves in the corner, and then shoot with as little movement as possible, frankly. Because these are intimate scenes, intimate moments. And we were being offered this incredible access that meant that we had to spend a lot of time with the families and the doctors. And once that trust was established, we just went to the corners and watched and observed for long periods. And that's why we don't have a lot of edits in the film as well, because I'm a big believer that part of the power of verite sequences, right, is not looking away and not allowing the viewer to look away. Because if you stay in the moment, if you have a 90-second clip, and we have a couple that are close to 90 seconds uncut, you experience the moment in a different way, right? And I wanted the viewer to be there as the event actually happened without an edit.
In cinema verite especially, you can often miss the mark and not create an emotional connection. It just feels like you're watching something rather than connected to something. So I just wondered, how did you build that trust with the families? But there was a very strong feeling of the families trusting us, the viewer, allowing you there to show us that really up close.
Yeah, trust is not it's not static, is it? It's trust is something that is built out of communication and consistency and constant sensitivity to the sort of the scale of what a family is undergoing. And so we started with long conversations that were intended to understand and to answer all questions. And one of the things that surprised me as a filmmaker was almost to a T, every family that was in these two wards in the north and the south, they wanted to collaborate with us, with very few exceptions. When we drilled down on that, there was one consistent reason why, and it was because despite the fact that they were facing this desperate moment where their child was on the cusp of death through complications from starvation, they knew that this was because of the conflict. They knew it was because there was an air and sea blockade over the country, which could be ended. And they all felt the only way that those political pieces could alter the current dynamic is if people knew what they were facing, if people knew that their child was on the cusp of death because of political intervention that didn't need to be there. So, for example, when Asila, the first infant that you see go to the ICU and then she passes, we
Oh, that was so
afterwards sat down and
Heart-wrenching.
we talked with that family, and they invited us to go to the mosque to document the ritual cleansing of the body, and then to document the burying of the body the same day. And we were stunned by that, frankly, that they wanted us to document that. But it's because they want people to know, because they want the war to end, and they feel like only if these stories can get out is there any chance that the war will end.
It's almost like you're their hope, Skye, because there is no way for them to share the story. So it's as if they open up their stories, you're their maybe last piece of hope left in order to get their message out, because they're not going to get that locally.
Well, hope is this idea that we rallied around throughout the filming, because it's as hard as it is to watch a child pass in front of you. I think it's vitally important that we allow people to be galvanized by those images and by those events. And flinching isn't going to get you there, right? I'm a deep believer that there is a power to looking and seeing, even if it's disturbing, because it can marshal resources and move people to action. And one of the surprising but gratifying things that's happened for us is, we wanted this film to be a vehicle for change, and we've set up these mechanisms where people can donate directly to the clinics, and we've already raised enough money to feed 1,700 kids for a month in Yemen.
Oh, that's incredible.
wow.
I never would have guessed that could have happened, but there's hope in that, right? There is hope in that, and I think it's a testament to the power of what cinema can do.
I have to ask this because Carter and I were talking about this earlier. I understand that you are a very strong advocate and a believer in empathy, and your approach is humanitarian cinema. So I'd love for you to dive a little deeper into that and talk to us about what that means to you and how you utilize that approach in your filmmaking.
Well, I think this whole trilogy has been an attempt to create an empathy machine. And I think, cinema is perfectly situated for that. It is the confluence of arts, right? It uses all these sort of classical principles that I think can move us in a particular way. And why not use that to generate empathy for those who receive our respect and attention, right? And so I really believe that cinema in that sense, if we can do it well, it can become this empathy machine, like Roger Ebert said, and it can also generate action. That's what I'm interested in. If you think about how hard it is to look at some of the work that these doctors do, CPR in an infant, for example, that's an inherently disturbing image, right? To see a young child have CPR, and yet what we've tried to do is use the tools of cinema to somehow make it beautiful, right? To use an aesthetic of composition, of good camera work, of beautiful music, so that even though it's a difficult image unto itself, if you incorporate beauty into it, then I think it will keep people engaged and keep them looking. And that's what we tried to do in Hunger Ward.
I definitely would have to say you gave the subjects some real dignity. I came away from your film with these, feeling a real sense of dignity and significance in what was being seen. In terms of the actual technique, how do you make these decisions about what's too much to follow, what's the right amount? Where do you draw lines? There are lots of lines that you have to draw every day in that process.
Yeah. You know that old quote, I forget who said it, but art disturbs and science reassures,
Right.
right? I guess I am a believer in that to some extent, right? It's okay to feel uncomfortable, right? If it's done carefully, and if it's done in service of a larger good, and if it's done with respect and dignity to those you're collaborating with. And I choose that word carefully. This was truly a collaboration. This wasn't an extractive piece of filmmaking where we parachuted in and parachuted out. This was built on a foundation of trust with the doctors, the patients, all of the families. And so, yes, we're constantly examining how much is too much, right? And I'm constantly looking for innovative ways to tell the story as well. And so that goes to sort of the filmmaking piece. If you remember, I opened the film with an aerial shot,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
That's the moment of minimal context to introduce people to the conflict, right? Because people so little about it. And if you recall, it's a locked frame descending down into the hospital as we unpack that minimal context. So we filmed that as an introduction, but then if you recall, we closed the film with an aerial.
Yes.
Except as we ascend, we start to rotate the frame. So that's a good example of how, as a filmmaker in the field, I'm always thinking about how can we incorporate the authentic experiences of our collaborators into how we tell the story. I rotated that frame in the end because over and over again, Nurse Makia, Dr. Al Sadiq, multiple members of multiple families told me how disoriented they felt by their displacement, how uncomfortable and unbalanced they felt by the fact that they'd been displaced 4 times by the war and that they were forced to bring their child for treatment for starvation in the modern world. And I thought, how can I incorporate that visually using the tools of cinema as we exit the scene to mirror their own experiences? And so by rotating the frame and holding on that one long shot, I'm trying to employ vertigo. Actually, once this drone stops moving, it seems as a visual effect as if the frame stops moving. It's very disorienting. And I hope you can see it on a big screen one day, because when you watch that scene on a big screen, it does momentarily create this sense of disorientation, of visual imbalance, which to me is what we're trying to communicate.
Skye, do you have any updates on any of the young children?
Yeah, we are. We get sort of biweekly updates,
Oh,
primarily through one of our colleagues, but also through the doctor and nurse. And so the wonderful news is that both Omema in the south and Abir in the north, they're both thriving. They were properly
Oh,
diagnosed, they received medicine, they've been put on specialty diets which are intended to slowly nurse them back to health. And I mean, I got a video of Omema a couple weeks ago, and she has a full round face now,
Wow.
right? And
so
so there
beautiful.
is hope, right? There is a way that, we can rally around the fact that if you do focus on supporting this really good work, children can thrive. Those most vulnerable because of this war can find health again and lead a relatively normal life.
Skye, there must be something for you personally that brings satisfaction when you see a project that you immersed yourself into bring such fruitful results. Like personally, what does that feel like to you? Aside from the filmmaker hat, just on a heart basis.
I just come from this place. I don't know why necessarily, but I do. I think we just have limited time on this planet. You could step out of your office and get hit by a bus. I could, I hate to say this horrible thing. I mean, any of us,
It's
we'd never
true.
know how much time we have,
It's true.
right? And I think I've always been someone, maybe it's because I've worked in so many difficult places. I just know that. I live with it every day, not in a doom and gloom sort of way, but I really do understand that my time on this planet is limited. And I want to use every moment I have of it to try to make this world a little bit better than I find it. But we each have agency. We each have the ability to influence our own little sphere. And as a filmmaker, this is what I can do. So it feels incredibly gratifying that in this particular case, we are having an impact.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the joy of being nominated. And Shorts TV has released a program where your film is going to be seen nationwide on the big screen. How that makes you feel, especially with what we were talking about earlier today.
Yeah, I just love the fact that Shorts TV is putting all the nominated films on the big screen. And I know it's a tricky year and it's a hybrid model and some have to go virtual. Cinema is meant to be experienced on the big screen,
Yeah.
ideally. And so the fact that you are making sure that's happening leading up to the Oscars, I will be forever grateful for. I have yet to see it on a big screen, my own film, if you can believe that.
Uh-oh.
So I don't know what that says about this year, but that kind of says it all,
Right.
right?
Right.
And in terms of the Oscars, I mean, what do you say? To be recognized by colleagues who I look up to so much on so many levels in the doc branch, attending the Oscars is, it was an honor the first time, and it's going to be an equal honor this time, even in this strange year of years.
Yes, exactly. Your films have a very distinct way of speaking to audiences, I think, and it's very much a pleasure to have your film, even though it's a very difficult film, a very difficult topic. It's such a revelation, and there is nobody that I've spoken to this year that has not been deeply touched, changed even by your movie. And that, I think, is what else can you want as a filmmaker, to have people tell you they've changed the way they think about a lot of things in life.
Yeah. Someone once said to me, you have a triangle. You have fame, you have money, and you have change, right? Pick two. Pick two in the film industry, right? And it's interesting, but I think I would pick change, right? I would
Yeah.
pick changing people's understanding, having people engage in something like ending a war, for example. That's what I want more than anything. And we've been very, very fortunate, Carter, that also we've gotten some attention. We've gotten some attention, and that's helping with that change part. So maybe they were right. Maybe you do get two.
Well, look, change will always sustain. I think creating the change that you bring will always sustain. But you have a website too that people can donate or help with Hunger Ward, right? Would you like to share that with our listeners?
Yeah, thanks for that. It's hungerward.org, and we have two primary tools there. One where at least American audience members can intervene directly with their senators and representatives, which is significant
Yeah.
in this case because it's taking pressure from our leaders to pressure the Biden administration to change stance in the country. And then we also have a mechanism where people can donate directly to the 2 clinics that we showcase in the film, and that money goes directly to the healthcare workers for use in treatment of the families who are in the hospital and clinic.
And maybe what he meant is the change, fame, and the money maybe doesn't go to you, but it goes to someplace else. So let's hope that that's exactly what happens, that it goes to these clinics.
I'm with you there. Maybe you can do more than 2 as long as I would.
Yes.
Right?
Exactly.
You know? I hope so.
Yeah.
See, I leave this more hopeful than I came into the conversation.
Yes, it's all about how determined you are. It's your determination and your personal perseverance. Skye, it's been such a pleasure speaking with you. I feel like there's just so much depth to the story, to you, and it's just been such an honor to be able to hear your version and your creativity on how you made this film. So thank you very much.
Yeah, well, thank you, and thank both of you
Skye,
for doing shorts. The shorts run this year. It does mean a lot to the filmmakers, and thanks a lot for doing the podcast too.
What a powerful film, Rasha. What did you think?
You know, Carter, to be honest, I was very moved. It was a bit difficult to watch at times, just looking at these innocent children. It's no fault of theirs, you know, and what they're having to go through. But I can understand why Skye made this film, and I thought it was very important that he shared this film with us because it's a topic that a lot of us maybe aren't even familiar with. So this was a very important story to tell.
I totally agree. He used impressive filmmaking techniques, and I thought actually the whole story of how he got into the country and how it took him a long time and why it just spoke to the urgency of the story to him. And I think, you know, when you're an audience member and you watch a story that's told well with a lot of passion from the filmmaker, even if it's this difficult, you really take the passion away and it touches you. So I loved it.
That's all the time we have for today. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to subscribe to our podcast to hear from more Oscar nominees.
See you soon.